Hi, everybody. Episode 9. It's actually episode 1. I'm lying. It's episode 1 of Gilded Age number 2. So I'm going to try to go through slides 1 through 44 today. So the American West, 1865 to 1890. Today in class, I have been explaining every single different region of the country from 1865 to 1890. You have to know that the whole Deep South, the former Confederate States, was sharecropping, basically, agricultural, and then sharecropping. And a lot of the black people that did not want to stay in the Deep South, especially the young people, they were part of the Great Migration from 1890 to like 1940, where like 40 million people moved north to the industrial north so that they didn't have to be basically still slaves in the Deep South. You have to know the whole Midwest, upper Midwest, Chicago, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, all the northern parts and all the way over to the Northeast, New York. All of these places became Pittsburgh, as you know, the industrial north. You have to know the factories. The Plain States, some of you were talking about that we have Pap Singleton. Pap Singleton, right after 1877, the Compromise of 1877, for him, the Great Betrayal. Shortly thereafter that, Pap Singleton moves like 2,000 people west to Kansas, and it's called Exodusters, so Exodus and dust, like the Dust Bowl. He moves out to that area. They don't thrive, but they still go because they're like, oh no, we're not staying here in the Deep South without those Union troops. So the Midwest states, that's agricultural. The Homestead Act, 1862, 160 acres. It's a very difficult life. And then the west toward the Rocky Mountains, we have mining, silver, gold, silver. I told some of you today about the gold and silver mines that people would have a lucky strike, not the cigarette, but the lucky strike, and they'd find a big bunch of gold, but they were smart not to yell or scream because other people would come to where they were mining and then take over, and or worse, people would come and rob them and possibly kill them for the lucky strike they found all of the gold. Some people just bailed and left as soon as possible, but it was actually very dangerous to have struck it rich because somebody knows that you are now rich and they'll come and try and steal that from you. So it was the Wild West. And you have to know that all of that stuff is all on top of the Native Americans. The Native Americans are out there trying to live their best life and being attacked at all angles. We're killing the buffalo, the bison, eradicating them so that we can eradicate the Native Americans. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So that's just a little basic premise. Some of you know I'm looking at the map over there. I said today that I wish that I were the Indians. Whenever we played Cowboys and Indians when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be the Indians. It seemed like a really cool life. Like camping all the time. Okay, the railroads opened the Great Plains to settlement. You have to know the 19th century equals railroads, manifest destiny. It was our destiny to go from sea to shining sea, to put railroads and people and telegraph lines across the entire nation, and indeed we do accomplish that. Native Americans unsuccessfully tried to defend their ancestral lands in the Indian Wars, and they faced federal sanctioned assimilation with the Dawes Act. You have to know the Dawes Act, 1887. Assimilating, cut their hair, the kids have to go to school, they rarely get to come home, they have to become Christians and learn Christianity. Their parents try to make them into farmers. Assimilation is trying to make them Americanized, try to make them be white. You have to know the Dawes Act, 1887. I was telling everybody how there are today many Indian reservations are casinos because that's not federal land. They aren't taxed, and because it's not illegal to have casinos there, and casinos you can make a lot of money. So people in Seminoles down in South Florida where I was, if you were a Seminole, you actually got a monthly check from the Indian reservation from the casinos every month just because you were a Seminole. Oh, and Native Americans today currently have free education. My cousin was adopted, and she was full Native American. She looks more Italian. She's kind of got olive skin. And she had a free education, and her sons are 50% Native, and they had 50% free education, free tuition. So check your ancestry. The Great West was largely untamed after the Civil War. It was full of wild bison, wildlife, Mormons, and many Mexicans and Indians. If you remember, remind me in class tomorrow, I will tell you about the Mormons and a story about when I lived in Fort Lauderdale with my roommate Dana, but if you don't want to hear it, don't ask. It's funny. Native Americans, Mexicans. Okay, the other thing that I want to say to you and that I was telling them about that today, is that in Mexico, that's like all of New Mexico, part of Texas, part of Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California, part of Oregon, Arizona, all of that was Mexico. That was Mexico. In 1848, President Polk kept poking people, poking the Mexicans to try to get them to go to war, and they did finally. And then because of social Darwinism, because we had the biggest guns, that we easily destroyed them. And there was a huge, massive chunk of the entire West that was previously Mexican territory. So my big thing is that people are always like, oh, hey, you're Mexican, go back to Mexico, go back to Mexico, go back where you came from. Except they came from there. They came from Arizona, they came from California, they came from Colorado, they came from New Mexico. It had all been Mexico. There's nowhere for them to go back to because they still lived where they had always lived. Just the boundary of the United States moved, but they had never lived elsewhere. So if you're out west, you can't really tell people to go back to Mexico because many of them had already been in Mexico, and then Mexico moved. The border moved. Okay, competition for land in the West was among white settlers, Indians, and Mexicans, and there was lots and lots and lots of conflict, especially between the soldiers and the Native Americans. After the Union troops left the Deep South, many of them went out west. After the Civil War, many of the troops went out west to start trying to eradicate Indians. Also, you have to know that black soldiers were called buffalo soldiers, and it was not because they only hunted the buffalo, and I do not know why. I've tried to look, and I don't know why they're called the buffalo soldiers. But even in World War I and World War II, we still referred to black military soldiers as buffalo soldiers. And this is it. This is this solitary life. 160 acres out in the plain states, a hard scrabble life. They had to build wells with windmills to pull the water out of the ground because there was so little water. You know that's where the Dust Bowl was, Oklahoma and everything. Post-Civil War migration to the West was a big part because of Homestead Act, Lincoln's Homestead Act of 1862. You get 160 acres of land if you could farm it all. If not, you would lose the land, and many people did lose it. It was very hard, as you can imagine, to farm 160 acres. How do you do that? Like, you couldn't afford the machinery to be able to do that. There was new machinery by that time, but you can't afford that. These people even brought their piano. And as you know, many farming families, 10, 12, 14 kids, because they were farmers. They needed all the help they could get, and they had just their family. So the Indians, with the Indians, we had treaties and treaties and treaties with the Indians, and we broke them and broke them and broke them and broke them over and over and over again. We have never, ever been fair or right or just to the Native Americans of this country, who are the only ones that are not immigrants. All the rest of us are immigrants if we are not Native American. As white settlement grew, rival Indian tribes fought against each other, but many also died of diseases. You know about the Trail of Tears. Back when you were in 8th grade, they told about the Trail of Tears, where we marched people from Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina up to the reservations in the middle states, and we gave them blankets that were covered in smallpox. Unbelievable. We would give them blankets to try to eradicate them that had smallpox. They also hunted dwindling herds of bison, which were intentionally being exterminated by the U.S. government. If we killed the bison, then we would be killing the Indians. The Sioux Indians expanded and conquered neighboring tribes in the Great Plains. Looks like such a cool life. It's like camping all the time. Indians scalped white people scalped Indians. You have to know the federal government dispersed tribes onto small reservations. We send people onto reservations. The soldiers responded to Indian resistance with strong military force. We came in with overwhelming might, social Darwinism, bigger guns. They were increasingly angered about how badly they were treated by the U.S. government, which is true. We were horrible. Indian wars were basically 1868 to 1890. And they were very, very deadly for the native populations. We dwindled the native populations a lot after the Civil War. Generals Sherman, Sheridan, and Custer all battled Indians. Famous, Custer's Last Stand. I'm going to talk about it in a second. Okay, in 1864 was the Sand Creek Massacre. This is still during the Civil War. These are Indian wars during the Civil War. We are still fighting the Civil War. Shivington is a general, and he basically took many heavily armed and strongly armed soldiers and attacked what were mostly women, children, and elderly in the Sand Creek Massacre. and just slaughtered them. Many of them were on their knees begging for mercy. They had white flags. They had just made a treaty with the government, so they were flying the stars and stripes, and they had white flags, and we shot and killed them and destroyed them anyway. So, as you can imagine, tit for tat, tit for tat. People saw the bodies of those lying there, cut all to pieces. They were mutilated. Women cut all to pieces with knives, scalped, their brains knocked out. Children 2 or 3 months old were smashed on rocks, all ages lying there, from sucking infants up to warriors who were mutilated by the United States troops. This is by the United States troops. Shivington is a general in the United States Army. And just destroyed them. So, after Colonel Custer found gold in the Black Hills, which was a reservation, thousands of gold miners flocked to the Sioux reservation. So the Sioux were given that land, and it's usually the terrible, horrible, awful land, but then they found gold. Next thing you know, gold miners like crazy, 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 so they told the Sioux they were going to have to move. Unfortunately, Custer made the fatal mistake of disregarding orders to wait for reinforcements. He had only like 400 men, and he was going to fight against 3,000 men, but he wanted to catch them off guard, so he decided that they could do it because they had stronger weapons and they were soldiers. And so, like an idiot, he attacked 3,000 warriors and people why can't I think of it? At the Battle of Little Bighorn, at the Little Bighorn River. And he attacked them after trying to force 10,000 Sioux back on the reservation. Custer's 7th Cavalry of 215 soldiers attacked 3,000 Sioux warriors. That's a fool's mission. What are you doing? They made the final mistake of not waiting for reinforcements. All he had to do was wait for reinforcements, and many other troops would come, but he didn't. He wanted to be a hero. They were destroyed, absolutely destroyed. As you can imagine, 215 soldiers. U.S. reinforcements later attacked and devastated the Sioux, but their leader, Sitting Bull, escaped. So there were reprisals, of course, for this. Okay, so I want to tell you about 1876. So that was June of 1876 when we have Custer's last stand and 3,000 Sioux absolutely destroy Custer and his troops. So what you should know is that July 4th, 1876 happened only a couple weeks after that. And so that was the centennial celebration. When I was in high school, in 1976, my freshman year in high school, was the bicentennial. 200 years since July 4th, 1776. So this was the centennial, 1876, just a couple weeks after Custer's last stand. And all over the nation, newspapers, yellow journalism. Oh, Custer, eradicated. They were destroyed. They were absolutely destroyed by the Native Americans. And what it did is it created such a fever pitch of hatred toward the Native Americans that after that time, everybody that even felt sad and sorry for them no longer felt sorry for them after those 215 soldiers were, as they were believed, massacred by the Sioux. Now remember, the Sioux were minding their own business when they were attacked by Custer. However, because Custer's troops were decimated by these 3,000 Sioux, then public opinion in the country turned against Native Americans for good, and after that time, it's not long before everybody's in reservations. By 1885, 1890, there's no free natives anywhere. They're all in reservations way up in the Dakotas and in the foothills and in Wyoming and Montana. They're all gone at that point. The Nez Perce Indians also revolted when gold seekers took over 90% of the reservation that the U.S. government had promised them. So even when we promised them reservations, if there was important things that we found there, then we just broke those treaties and went back on our word. Nez Perce meant pierced nose. They had pierced noses. And then Chief Joseph. Finally, Chief Joseph surrendered his Nez Perce troops after a long battle and gave this famous speech. This is famous. And even in English class, they read this speech. This is late. This is the 1870s, 1880s, and Chief Joseph is just tired of everybody dying. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. The old men are all dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. Chief Joseph, famous speech, and it's one of the last speeches that's given about the Indians just giving up. There's no way they can fight social Darwinism. The military and the weapons of the U.S. government are now way, way beyond anything they could ever be able to fight against. And so it's kind of the end. By the 1890s, there's only reservations. There's no Wild West anymore. There's no frontier anymore. They surrendered after being pushed into Mexico. Apache Indians in Arizona and New Mexico, led by Geronimo, were the most difficult to subdue. Some of you know, like when you jump off of something, you're supposed to go, Geronimo! I don't really know why. I don't even know if it's him. I assume it's him, but sometimes when you jump off something, you're supposed to yell Geronimo. I have no idea how that has anything to do with him or if it does. Okay, by the end of the 19th century, a series of forced removals and brutal massacres at the hands of white settlers in the army had taken place against the Native Americans. Now people had basically free reign to go, and you were allowed to just kill Indians, to kill the native populations. There were women and children and elderly, and nobody cared anymore. After Custer's last stand, and after 1876 and that big, huge promotion in yellow journalism talking about how violent these savages are, now everybody is against the Native Americans. The railroads played a key role in the takeover of the West by white settlers. So you have to know that those railroads are being putting out there everywhere. So one of my favorite stories is that the Native Americans used to have a rope that when people were coming on other horses, they would hide behind trees and they would have a rope on the ground. And when the horses came, they would pull the rope up high enough so that these racing horses would trip and the people that were coming to attack them would fall and they could easily attack those people. So it turns out that there's a famous story of that when a train was coming, that Native Americans, they didn't know, they didn't understand what this thing was. And so they tried to use a rope to stop this train, which I can assume only ended with them being slammed against the train unless, of course, they let go. But I thought that was kind of funny. They tried to trip the train. The native population of North America had dwindled to a mere fraction of what it once had been. Some of you know about Native Americans in Latin America, and like 95% of them died. They went from 20 million down to like 1 million. The same thing happened to us. It was a little bit later. But by 1890, there's no more frontier. There's no more wild natives out anywhere. We've decimated them all. Millions of buffalo, the staple of the Indian diet and culture, had roamed the prairie freely and were hunted for their meat and their furs and for sport, and not a single thing about that buffalo was not used. Every single ounce of that buffalo was used by the Native American population. And then instead, even white people were allowed to ride on trains and just shoot buffalo and kill them so that we would eradicate the buffalo, and by doing that, eradicate the Indians. So for sport from the trains, people were allowed to take their rifles and shoot and kill buffalo as the trains were going across the frontier. Just awful and sad. And of course, we didn't do anything with them. We just left them there to die. We didn't do anything. The Native Americans used every ounce of their body. As white settlers moved west, the demise of the buffalo was intentional in order to eliminate the Indians as well as the buffalo. We did it on purpose. Oh, and see, the trains hated this part. Like that there could be this huge, big group of buffalo and they couldn't get through, and even they had the little scoop thing to try to move the trains to try to move, but they couldn't. They still couldn't go. If there was a herd of buffalo, they couldn't get through them, and they'd have to wait. They'd shoot their guns in the air and try to make them go away, but it also slowed down trains, and so they would all just kill buffalo if they could. Pelts, pelts, pelts. And those are actually skulls. Those are buffalo skulls. Look at all of those. Make me sick. That makes me sick that that makes me sad. There used to be buffalo. By 1885, only about 1,000 buffalo remained. We were talking about here, Station Camp High School. They are the bison. I actually asked that principal when I had an interview there. I asked the principal, like, why are you bison? And he said, because there were roaming bison all over this area at one time. They were all over Tennessee. Some of you know by Top Golf that there's some statues of bison and cowboys that are right there near the Top Golf on Dickerson Pike. So, famously, Helen Hunt Jackson writes a novel, A Century of Dishonor, and she focuses on the injustices committed against the Indians. She sent a copy to every member of Congress asking for their support to support the Indians. So she tells about all of the broken treaties and the terrible, absolutely horrible things that we have done to the Native Americans. She put it in a book. I'm going to write a novel in which will be set. Watch Gangs of New York, it's good. Watch Gangs of New York, it's good. In which will be set forth some Indian experiences in a way to move people's hearts. People will read a novel when they will not read serious books. So she wrote this book so that people would be moved to care about the natives. And then the Dawes Act. This is the Dawes Act. This is us taking native kids and cutting them. This must be a girl because she still has her long hair. If it were a boy, then they would have their hairs cut. So they had to assimilate and act white, be Christian. The Dawes Act. Time to Americanize, to assimilate. This is a famous saying. Kill the Indian and save the man. So kill the Indian inside of them. Take away their language. Take away their culture. Take away their religion. Take away everything. Save the kid, save the man, but take away anything Indian about them. Kill the Indian and save the man. Famous quote. This is the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, one of the most famous places where children were sent to be assimilated. And so a lot of the kids, if you remember, it was a boarding school. They were sent away, far away from their parents, and rarely allowed to go back and visit their parents for fear that they would go back to their Indian ways. So the civilizing process began at Carlisle, began with clothes. Whites believed the Indian children could not be civilized while wearing moccasins and blankets. Their hair was cut because in some mysterious way, long hair stood in the path of our development. They were issued the clothes of white men. High collars, stiff-bosomed shirts, and suspenders fully 3 inches wide were uncomfortable. White leather boots caused actual suffering instead of their moccasins and their native clothes. They wanted them to act white. 1879. I felt that I was no more Indian, but would be an imitation of a white man. Not an actual white man, just an imitation. Jim Thorpe, he is a Native American and one of the most famous. He earned gold medals in the pentathlon and decathlon in the 1912 Olympic Games. Played in the NFL, MLB, and pro basketball. He was voted the greatest athlete of the 20th century by ESPN. A Native American. The hardliners just wanted to kill him. Not kill the Indian, save the man, just kill him. Kill them all. Dawes Act was to help Indians assimilate by sending them away to boarding schools. All of these kids, make them act white, make them assimilate, make them Americanize, make them be Christians. And then it also took all of the Indian land and it put it all for sale. So all of that land, Indians were allowed to have the land if they agreed to be farmers. If they did not, then the land was sold out from them. It ended the legal existence of all tribes and told Indians if they would conform, they could attain U.S. citizenship in 25 years if they would just be good boys and girls and if they would do what we tell them to do. The Dawes Act gave Indians severalty, individual ownership of the land, by dividing reservations into homesteads. It would lead, Dawes wrote, to a personal sense of independence that would encourage Indians to adopt white ways. Another reformer hoped to make Indian men intelligently selfish, with a pocket that aches to be filled with dollars. We want to turn them capitalists too. An appeal by the Hopi Indians to not take their land away. And then, indeed, in 1924, full citizenship was given to all Indians. Ironically, it was a time when the KKK was one of the strongest in the 1920s. And anti-immigration fervor was huge. And yet we gave the natives citizenship, just like we said we would. A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. And that has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. 1887. It's one of the most famous comments of all time regarding Indians. Kill the Indian and save the man. 1887. So this is talking about how this is a very big thing happening right now. The Washington Redskins, we have found out, are indeed finally going to change their name. Because Redskins is a pejorative. It is not a nice thing to say. So it's showing you the Cleveland Indians, how ridiculous. My son went to Florida State, but the Seminoles are an Indian tribe. So they actually keep getting to be Seminoles because it's not a pejorative. It's not mean to talk about being a Seminole. So this is showing how stupid it would look if we had called other people team names. By 1900, Indians had lost half of their land, but the population of Indians actually grew on these reservations, but they were horribly, wretchedly poor. These reservations were never the good lands. There was nothing but cactus, rattlesnakes, heat, rocks, and insects. Many, many of our people died of starvation. The lands that they were given them were the most wretched and horrible lands, and nothing, where there were no buffalo anymore. There was nothing. So the economy of the West. That means, how do they make money? How do they make a living? Mining, ranching, and farming, and their dependence on the railroads represented the prevailing economic elements of the West. If we talk about economics, we're talking about, what do you do to make a living? I'm a teacher. Those are my economics. I make money by being a teacher. Which encouraged the privatization of Western lands, effectively ending the notion of a frontier. The frontier is closed. By the time we kill all of the Indians or put them on reservations, we consider the frontier closed. We've gone from sea to shining sea, just like we said we would. Manifest destiny, our obvious destiny, to go from sea to shining sea. Okay, so out west, again, mining. Gold, silver, and iron ore for tracks. We're going to make that into steel in our future. This is what a mine looked like. Look at this. This is the top, and then down. And we're down here digging, trying to find gold or iron ore or silver. Awful. You guys know about the canary in a coal mine, right? Famously, that's like West Virginia, that they would take a canary, a bird, in a cage in a coal mine with them, and they would keep an eye on the canary, and the canary would sing. They would keep an eye on the canary. But if the canary died, that means the little baby bird lungs got filled with some sort of bad air, and that meant that they're going to die very soon too. That if that bird died, that they're also going to die. So famously, it was like an early warning signal to say, get out. The bird died. The canary's dead. Get out of the mine. We're losing our air. So that's why you hear about a canary in the coal mine. A canary in a coal mine is a warning that things are going to get bad real quick. Gold was discovered in California in 1849. We know about that. In Colorado in 1858. I thought it was 1859. Within a month or two, it was all out. Like that. Everybody rushes out there. That's why it's called a gold rush. And very, very quickly, the lucky strike is over. The Comstock Load was Nevada in 1859. There was the largest ever, 340 million in silver and gold. It's called the Comstock Load. It's the most famous, biggest, largest lucky strike of all time. Look at that existence. That's all you do. You're in some dark tunnel, just digging. I can't. It's like almost being in your own grave. This is awful. Smaller lucky strikes drew prospectors to various western states. Whenever there's a lucky strike, people would hightail it out there to try to get rich. Look at this. Look at this existence. Come on. After surface gold was found, big corporations came in with ore breaking machine to break gold-bearing quartz, and then they hired people. They didn't get to keep whatever they found. They'd have to empty all their pockets, and then everything, they were searched to make sure any bit of gold or silver they found down there that was given to the company owner, to these big corporations. Okay, ranching. Ranching in the West and the marketing of beef across the whole country became possible because of the Transcontinental Railroad, because now you can send those cows to market on the Transcontinental Railroad. So I want to talk about cowboys. Cowboys would drive these herds, but you have to know, only about a third of all cowboys were white people. All the movies, cowboys are white. All the movies, cowboys are white. Cowboys are white. Most of the cowboys are Mexican. A third of them are Mexican, and another third are black. They are freedmen that went west. And there are black cowboys, and there are Mexican cowboys. Caballeros. Caballero is, I think, like a caballo is a horse. And so caballeros ride horses. So we learned from Mexicans how to be caballeros, how to be cowboys. We learned from them how to be able to be good cowboys. But then, of course, in popular white lore, all of the cowboys are always white men, and that's far from the case. A third were black, and a third were Mexican. The long drive saw Texas cowboys herd cattle to railroads to send to slaughterhouses in the Midwest. Slaughterhouses are the meat packing plants, as you know, in Chicago and Green Bay. $40 a head, literally for a head. So for every head of cow, one cow head is $40. But you had to drive them 800 miles, and you did it slowly because you didn't want them to lose weight. You wanted them to get fat. You wanted them to eat all of that grass all the way there. $648 a head in 2007. So now one cow can get you $648. Many cattle were taken by railroad to stockyards owned by the beef barons, Swift and Armour. I don't think it's an S. Swift and Armour. The beef barons in Chicago. And this is what it looked like. This is what I'm telling you. And that they would have these animals, and they would have these big hooks that they would be hanging from. But those animals, those hooks that they're on, they didn't put them up there afterwards. They've been on that hook ever since they were an animal, and they would get ripped up into the sky onto that hook. And then they would be gutted and cut in half and cut in half. So absolutely horrible. The meatpacking industry sprang up in places like Chicago, Green Bay, and Cincinnati. I forgot about Cincinnati. Sheep herders, shepherds, sheep herders, and farmers used the new barbed wire to keep cattle off their fields, making cattle drives impossible. So there's this big problem between ranchers who had farmland and cattle who they wanted to roam free and be able to eat whatever they wanted. So whenever they came along farms, they would just go. The cattle would go and eat all of the food. Why wouldn't they? They'd want to eat the food. And so the ranchers and cattlemen had big fights. And so this new invention, barbed wire, made it so that ranchers could put barbed wire all the way around their entire property, and it was a lot cheaper. They didn't have to build a big fence. They could put posts and put barbed wire, and it would keep the cattle out. It was a very important invention, this barbed wire. I like that. Railroads were integral to helping farmers develop in the West. They had to be able to send their corn or wheat or soy or whatever they were growing. The easiest, cheapest way to do that was to do that. The West is Uncle Sam's farm. I got to make them stop singing. Oh, they're not going to stop. The West is Uncle Sam's farm. So the easiest way was to be able to ship all of that produce by train. Famous, a long time ago that you would go by stagecoach out west. That's before the trains. Lincoln's Homestead Act, you know that part. 49% of people living in the Great Plains had no legal claim to be there. They just squatted. Sod houses. That's grass. Sold western lands for revenue, but now they began giving it away. So Kansas, because it's a garden spot of the world, anything that the other country will grow will work less. That's your life. That's what you do every day, all day. People move west to grow wheat. I can't imagine, honestly. I just can't. 500,000 families move west to claim land. Sod. So speculators would buy a lot of the land, buy a lot of land, and then when it got very rich or very higher value, then they would sell it. So soddy. Get it? Sod. Okay, it wasn't easy farming that. There's no rain, no water. So they needed irrigation. And then, of course, you know the Dust Bowl is going to happen in Oklahoma and parts of those regions out in the prairie states in the 1930s. That's what the Dust Bowl looked like. Oh, finally done singing. So these are the years. This is the years that all of these places became states. Western populations grew, new states were added. Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming. All of these states. See, there are all these later states after the Indians. The Indians are now on reservations. 1889, 1890, 1896. They're on reservations. All these states after the Indians. So the Sooners, this is crazy. The unassigned lands of the Oklahoma Territory were open to settler claims on April 22nd, 1889. Thousands of people were in line on the border waiting for a gunshot that began the legal race to claim land and put a stake and you claim your land. So it was free, but you had to race out there. Some people tried on wagons. Some people even tried on bicycles. And some people just ran. So people are racing to claim. They shot a gun, and then it was go, and everybody go, and you had a stick, and you stake your land like that. However, some people snuck in early to claim illegally, so they went the night before, and then when they shot the gun, they went out there later after the gun was shot, and they acted like they'd gotten there first when they had not, and they called them Sooners. So the Oklahoma Sooners were the people that cheated. They cheated. They went there before and snuck in and illegally took the land, and yet that's the name of that college's mascot, the Sooners. That means the Oklahoma Cheaters. Indian lands were reduced to allow further controlled settlement. Thousands of Sooners took land illegally. They're cheaters. Do you hear me, Amy? It's one of my friends in Florida. She's a Sooner. By 1880, the U.S. Census showed that the frontier no longer existed. 1876, again, that was Custer's last stand and that massacre. And then right after the centennial, it was only within years that there's no frontier anymore. There's no wild frontier. The western frontier symbolized opportunity, and the closing of the frontier had a huge impact on the American psyche. There's nowhere to run to. There's no land to go claim anymore. And that's why imperialism is going to be a big deal in our future, about us going to possibly take over other nations, thus the Spanish-American War. In reality, few people actually left the cities for the West. Most were just immigrants and ranchers, especially like in the Dakotas that were in Ohio and all that, where there were Germans and Scandinavians who were actual farmers, went west. Most immigrants stayed right in the cities. That was the actual safety valve. People could make a living there, and so most of the immigrants came into the cities. There are those wagon trains. Government agencies and conservation organizations fought against corporate interests about public control over natural resources in the West. They wanted it to be all private control in the hands of the people that moved out there. So they used to have these wagon trains. Before there were trains, there were these wagon trains. I always thought, what happens when you came on the Grand Canyon? Right? Your wife, Bessie, is driving. You're in the back sleeping. And she's like, honey, can you wake up? Honey, you should wake up. And then you wake up, and then your wife is at the Grand Canyon. You're like, really? I've been asleep an hour. And you found the biggest hole on earth? What's happening? I know, it had to have happened, right? Somebody had to have come up on the Grand Canyon when they were going west. That would be sad. National parks were created to preserve the wilderness of the former frontiers. Yellowstone in 1872, Yosemite and Sequoia in 1890. After these, the most famous person for creating national parks and nature preserves is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt creates the most national parks. But these big ones were created in 1872 and 1890. So that's good. I haven't been there. I want to see those. I haven't seen them. I want to see a redwood tree. So we have the U.S. Fish Commission and creation of Department of Interior. Cabinet position charged with managing federal lands reflected the government's interest in conservation, trying to protect our resources. And then you have to know about John Muir. Speaking of Teddy, they became good friends. I think that's John Muir, but I don't honestly know. The Sierra Club was funded by John Muir and supported by Teddy Roosevelt to protect and preserve Western lands. Struggles of the Western farmer. I'm going to stop there. Okay, FYI, this is a very famous picture, and everybody thinks this is the farmer's wife, and it's actually his daughter. It's a little weird, isn't it? It's not his wife. It's his daughter. Bye.